Hello, Thanksgiving Masketeers. Eric from Dead Tech here, and today I am going to do another one of the reader question roundups. So for those of you who have been enjoying, I've done a couple of these niche reader question videos, but I am still working through the backlog in, first out fashion, and I still have a lot of niche oriented reader questions, so I'm going to do a roundup of a few of those here today. Now, if you were wondering about me and what I'm up to, I am actually on vacation, but the business of reader questions is just too important to take a vacation. Nah, I'm just kidding. I mean, I am on vacation, but it's not that it's so important. It's just that, you know what, I actually kind of like creating content, so I guess that's fun. Hopefully for some of you, it's definitely fun for me. So yeah, I am on vacation. I'm having a good time, but I am doing a little bit of content over the course of that vacation here in the Florida Keys. So anyway, today I'm going to do reader questions that are about whether or not you can pay me for consultative work. I'm going to do one about the idea of scale, and then a couple about the idea of pricing and situations related to hourly billing, or as I prefer, not hourly billing. So if that stuff sounds interesting, stay tuned. All right, the first question here is a pretty easy one. It is, I'd be happy to pay you for a bit of time one-on-one to help me figure this out. Is that an option? And I'm posting, that's actually a comment here, but I do get that from time to time, and I'm not doing this just to like flex on the video that, you know, people offer to pay me for my time. I have an answer to that. It's a simple one-word answer, and the answer is no. But I feel like that's maybe counterintuitive enough that it's worth doing in the form of a reader question to kind of explain why I, a longtime consultant that also has a history of doing developer training, don't respond to these types of requests, even if you are willing to pay me. So the reason that I don't do this style of consulting with people is, I guess the simplest way to put it is because I'm not sure if talking to me is going to give you value. Now, as a consultant, what I used to do was B2B, business to business consulting. And typically my consulting came at a pretty high rate, and I also got away, I think the last time I had an hourly rate, I was approached about doing some expert witness stuff, and I might have quoted $300 or $400 an hour. I think the last time I was doing anything hourly, if somebody demanded a rate, I would say $300 an hour. That's a hefty price tag to ask in the business to consumer, B2C world. And make no mistake, if you're on my website asking me for like career advice or help picking a niche, even if it's business minded or business focused, you're still almost certainly writing me a check from your personal checking account. And that is not the style of consulting I've ever historically done. And it would be expensive to pay for an hour or whatever of my time at that hourly rate. Now, I don't actually charge hourly rates, and we'll get to this a little bit later in the video. What I would typically do over the last bunch of years when it came to consulting is that I would do a discovery call that had no real obligation, and I'd follow that discovery call up by going off and kind of thinking through how I thought I could help the person I was talking to, and then getting back on another call and going over a proposal with them. So the idea with the discovery call was I'm just going to get on the phone, no obligation, no money, I'm not running a clock or a meter, and just listen to you. And if I think I can help solve your problem, then I'm going to put together a proposal for an amount of work that's worth it for me. So like as a hypothetical, it might be that some company says, hey, I've got you know, these like 5 or 6 people working for me in this group of the IT org chart, and it's really dysfunctional, we're not getting anything done, there's toxic infighting or whatever.
I beat the shit out of some kids today, but it's for a purpose. It made me feel good about myself.
You need many years of therapy.
Can you come and like let me know what you think of this and help? And what I might do is listen to all this, ask some questions on the discovery call, and then go off and think about what kind of value I would place on this, or even kind of go through that on the discovery call. Like, well, okay, your spend on this salaried staff is say $800,000 a year, and maybe you're so unproductive that you're really only getting $300,000 a year worth of value out of that. So if I can fix this problem for you, you're talking about $500,000 a year worth of, you know, savings and efficiency, so to speak. So yeah, I'll come in, you know, 3-4 days. I'll charge you, let's say, $25,000 to help you give you a roadmap and a suggested way to like sort out these personnel issues and whatnot. So that's an example, real quick off the cuff, of like a hypothetical discovery and then proposal that's value based. And because that's how I was working, understand the pattern of that B2B consulting. I'm going to have a free call. I'm not overly worried about like running a meter or like my time for that. It's just interesting to listen to people's problems and think about whether I can help or not. But the idea here is I may or may not be able to help. I do a lot of discovery calls where I'd kind of say like, yeah, you could outsource this, or I don't even know if this problem's worth solving, or I'm not the one to solve it. But when I would actually get invested and dive in, it was typically for a 5+ figure payday. And that looks nothing like, hey, Eric, can I pay you for an hour of your time to get your input on, matters related to my career? Now, don't get me wrong, I like giving that style of advice, but my whole pattern in B2B consulting was to give that kind of advice away for free and then to see if I thought there was a way that I could deliver like a large amount worth of value to an organization. In the B2C world, giving human beings advice, there's nothing like that. I'm not going to get on a phone call with you and say like, don't worry about paying me. But if I give you advice in your career that winds up paying off and you land, a higher paying job, then I don't know, in 5 years, give me $10,000. Like it falls down. That whole model falls down in the B2C world. And so for me, I've always been a little bit uncomfortable with like B2C kind of stuff outside of like, my book or whatever that's just a credit card swipe. But I don't want to charge expensive price tags for advice. I have no prior history of doing that in the B2C world. So I'm not an expert, one-on-one over the course of an hour advice giver. I'm an expert in doing discovery and then figuring out if there's a bigger ticket engagement there. And I just don't see that materializing in the B2C world. So that is the longer explanation for why I don't do that kind of thing. And frankly, my mantra, my operating philosophy, why I do these reader questions, I used to do office hours at a startup incubator, is I'll just give you some advice for free. Like I don't really put such a high premium on advice. What I put the premium on is if I can foresee a way to help you solve a really expensive problem. And the expensive problem might be there if you're trying to pick a niche or what have you, but the value in delivery isn't clear to me, so I don't want to get into the business of charging you for it. So hopefully that clears up the counterintuitive idea that when people are offering me 100, 200, 300 bucks an hour or whatever you think my time would be worth, and I say no, like that probably seems crazy at first blush that I would say no to easy money or whatever you want to call it, but it's kind of a matter of integrity. I've never had a history of delivering that kind of deliverable, so I can't say with any confidence that if you pay me 300 bucks for an hour of my time on the phone, you're going to get $300 worth of value out of that. So just don't do it. Okay, question number 2. This is a part of a really long email. I'm just going to show you the part here that pertains to the question that's actually being asked, because in this, I remember this email exchange with this particular person. We were kind of going back and forth and talking about some things. If memory serves, but there was one piece in here that is a question that I wanted to pop out for the reader question roundup, so here that is. I have also come to the conclusion that scale ruins everything. Quick aside, this is a position that I hold to some degree or another. Like I believe that everything kind of decays with scale, so that's what he's referring to, that he has come to that same conclusion. It concentrates a lot of resources in one place, which brings out self-interest in otherwise team players, and also externally draws the zero-sum people out of the woodwork to try to take. As such, I'm not really worried about failure, but I am more concerned about how to make success sustainable. I would love to hear your thoughts on that point. So all these months later, the thing that I'd really like to address here is the idea of, so I agree, obviously, since he's agreeing with me, I agree that scale tends to create problems as you scale. But the idea that the problem with scale is concentrating a lot of resources in one place is an interesting one that I think I have a subtle sort of disagreement with, which is, it's not that that I think that's a wrong statement. It's more that I think the concentration of a lot of resources in one place isn't the cause of scale, or isn't a heavy correlation with scale. It's like an instance of scale. So I think what we're referring to here, the idea of scale concentrating a lot of resources in one place, is specifically the idea of a commercial interest, meaning if somebody comes along and says, like a venture capitalist says, like, I'm going to dump $50 million on you to go solve the problem.
Woo. Yeah, man. Whole lot of race, man. Whole lot of jumping jacks.
well, then those resources are all in one place and they're money. And yes, people do come out of the woodworks in that situation. So it's not that it's a wrong statement, but I don't think the fundamental problem with scale is that sometimes there's great resources associated with the interest in the problem that the scale is supposed to solve. That was kind of a mouthful, so maybe I'll also try to say it a different way. You scale up to solve sometimes problems that are hard to solve without scaling up. And a lot of times those are expensive problems and there's heavy commercial interest. And that's where the resources come into play. But I think scale has problems just all on its own outside of any of that. And I'll go into that a little. So I think the core issue when it comes to scale and why everything kind of asymptotically goes down to suck, as you scale up is because the one common thread with any kind of scale in any situation is complexity. So to illustrate what I mean by this, consider the idea of communism, and I don't mean this in the political sense. As any of you who follow my videos know, I really don't want to get into political discussions, like especially these days in America. I think they're almost like terminally stupid. So I mean communism in, I guess, of sorts the Karl Marx sense, but the idea literally of from each according to ability to each according to need. The idea that some collective of people would pool their resources and work together in an ad hoc sort of way to try to get everybody what they need with the inputs of the group as a whole. Now, there is a place where this works phenomenally well and is practiced all over the world, and it's called the nuclear family.
What the hell is that?
That's a 2015 Tartan Prancer. It's the Honda of Albania. Let's hit the road.
So you have, let's say, in an average family, a mother and a father and a couple of kids or something like that. Maybe mom is the breadwinner, maybe dad is staying home with the kids, or vice versa, like who knows. Maybe they're both breadwinners, but you have, the breadwinner or the breadwinners who are supplying, the resources, and then the children who are, parasites that are, no, I'm just kidding. You have the children that are kind of receiving those resources, but the family as a whole is saying, okay, let's make judgment calls based on who needs what, and we're all going to kind of get through this together. Works well at the family level. Once you get up to like maybe the extended multi-generational family level, I think that still works well, but with, conflicts and disagreements. And I think it gets a little more complex to do that same kind of thing if you have maybe grandparents and a couple of adult children and their spouses all in one large household. Those conversations about how to spend money and everything probably get more complicated, maybe more contentious. Now, let's say you scale that up to like a neighborhood that has like a village association or a condo association or homeowners association. There you start to add even more complexity to the mix in the form of elections and bylaws and rules, and then you scale up and up and up from there. Now, the idea of communism really starts to break down probably well before the Dunbar number. It breaks down in ways that are really related, I think, at the core to complexity, which is the complexity of decision making, especially as people know and love and care about each other less and less well. Centrally planning everything really breaks down because of the complexity of those interactions. More people, more interest, harder to communicate. You have to come up with representative systems that are reductionist, electors, committees, that type of thing. So the more you have scale, the more you have complexity that reduces the level of discourse, ad hoc decision-making, expert decision-making, etc. And the reason I use that communist example is because it's sort of the opposite of like resource hoarding. The whole example and idea of communism is to kind of pool resources. So in theory, that should be a place where all of the resources being concentrated in one place isn't a problem. And yet scale still degrades the whole thing. Scale is still a problem. So if you go back to like the world of like, maybe VC capitalism that you're talking about here, is the resources being all in one place a problem? Well, sure, it can be, because if you dump $50 million on a company and say, go hire, 80 people to go do stuff, you're going to get a lot of hucksters that are looking all that money and opportunity and the chaos of hiring that many people, and they are going to sneak in and suck. I mean, like, that's just inevitable. But I don't think that's a problem of the resources and the resource allocation. I think the problem with that is the idea of the complexity of, let's take $50 million and really quickly hire 80 people. That's a very complex thing to do. You're reducing it to a great deal of simplicity in theory. And so this complexity not really working well as you attempt to do and solve a larger problem. That it's that complexity that's killing things. All right, moving right along here, reader question 3. This had to do with a blog post that I wrote where I sort of excoriated the idea of hourly billing. I'll put that blog post down below in the show notes. And I am not a fan of hourly billing. And in this particular blog post, what I did was I specifically took aim and kind of dumped on people like CPAs or lawyers who provide a predictable expert service and still bill by the hour. So like, for instance, the two things that I mentioned, or the two things, I don't remember if I mentioned one in the post, but here are two examples. One is like Hit Subscribe, for instance, is an S Corp, files as an S Corp, and we have, fewer than 10 employees, and we're a service-based business. So the tax return for that type of business, that S Corp that does what we do, should be a very predictable deliverable. Anybody who does, 50, 100, 500, however many of these filings each year, any CPA that does this number should really have that down to a science. And the same thing with like contract review. I fired an attorney that we had for running a meter when I hadn't even asked him to do anything. He had just been doing an estimate. But I said, how much would you charge me to review this 5-page contract? Instead of answering my question, he just did it and then sent me an invoice for I don't remember what.
That'll be $6.
Okay, and how much is that in pubes?
And then I paid that invoice because I don't really like arguing with people about like relatively nominal sums of money, and then I just don't have a lawyer anymore because I fired that guy. So I don't think this is a good way to conduct business for a professional. Now, a caveat here, I'm not saying that the CPA we've used that does hourly billing at times, or that this lawyer are unprofessional in the way you might think of it, although like misreading my email asking for an estimate is probably a little unprofessional. But I don't think, it's just the incumbent methodology, but I think the incumbent methodology is kind of like a bad look and unprofessional in that if you own a deliverable as an expert and it's a very repeatable, predictable deliverable, if you bill by the hour, you're basically saying, well, I don't know how long this is going to take me, and I'm going to externalize all the risk to you. So like, I can't be bothered to understand how long it takes me to do this thing I do day in and day out all the time. So I'm just going to run a meter, and then I'm going to send you, who doesn't know any of this stuff, a bill at the end. And then if you don't like it, you're just going to have to dig into how I've spent my time and kind of audit my hours and then disagree with me about whether I'm efficient. Now, to me, that's a really unprofessional look. The professional would say, I have done a ton of S Corp filings. I know how this goes. I know where the sources of complexity are. So if I do a return for you, it's going to cost $1,000. Here are a couple things that could go wrong, in which case I'm going to tack a rider fee onto it, with your permission, of course. So if it turns out that you had a bad filing in the year before you engaged with us, the charge to go back and fix that is, $2,000 or whatever. That's how a professional would deal with this type of thing. You understand your deliverable well enough, not only to understand what it costs predictably on average, like look back and, I've delivered 500 of these, here are my costs, here's the margin I want, this is what I'm charging, but also to understand the contingencies and to navigate people through them. That's what a professional does. An amateur just starts a meter and is like, well, who knows? I'm not feeling especially productive today, so it's twice as much because, I had a hangover and it took me a long time. I don't want to get too far into ranting before I read the reader question, but this context is important because this reader question, actually the two I'm going to do, both came in the form of comments on a blog post that I wrote about this. So you can get more of my take on that blog post below, but a couple things to remember. Number one, I am talking not about employees, which is an entirely appropriate hourly arrangement, or generalized kind of like non-expert contractors that you pay to do hourly work. I am talking specifically about professionals that are experts in a high-end type of deliverable, probably people charging more than $100 an hour. So CPAs, lawyers, doctors, if they would, software engineers, depending on if you're packaging that expertise into something that isn't generalist app dev, which I think of as non-expert commodity labor, even though it's expensive. But anybody who is delivering a predictable output that they have done a whole bunch of times and they should be really expert in doing. Okay, so that's a lot of preamble to the reader question. Now here is the actual reader question. It was a comment. He appreciated the article that I wrote and then was curious about how a couple things would work in this flat priced slash value priced expert world. So he says, let's say you run an Amazon business making X product. You don't need to hire employees to pack and ship. You hire people as independent contractors and then pay them, not by the hour, but by the amount of product packed and shipped. They perform a critical function for your company, shipping the product, with specific expertise, packing and shipping your orders each day, but you are only paying them by product shipped. They get no other compensation or contract. That's great for you as a business owner. I'm going to invert the pronouns here so it's a little easier on you, the listener, reader. Great for you as a business owner, sucky for them as the contractor, because once they maximize their efficiency packing and shipping, they will only be able to earn so much money per product packed and shipped. Do they, as independent contractors, raise their rate per parcel, knowing that because they're not unionized, they can be replaced by some other desperate worker? Do they try to make the case that they move from per piece pricing to a salary or a general rate? What are your thoughts, meaning mine, Eric, thoughts here? It's an interesting question, and the reason I harped a little bit on the idea of expert labor is this is not that. So it doesn't really apply. I wouldn't criticize these people for wanting an hourly rate necessarily, because stuffing things into boxes isn't expert labor. It is, so he got into an interesting edge case that I hadn't talked about. It's highly predictable, but not expert. And I actually, personally, as a business owner, like I'm just imagining owning this business, I don't think I would care too much whether we paid these people by the hour or whether we paid them by parcel. And the reason I wouldn't care is because in either case, I'm going to be able to reason very predictably about cost. So if we're paying, I don't know what minimum wage is, $15 an hour or something. If we're paying $15 an hour and there's 10 of these people doing it, it's $150 an hour run rate, and maybe they're stuffing, 500 packages an hour, whatever. I don't know how this works. But if they're on average stuffing 500 packages an hour, I can get that right back as a business owner to like the price per parcel, and I can make financial decisions about that cost, even if these people who are kind of doing this automaton work are billing per hour. So if these people wanted to bill me per hour, God bless, I suppose. If they wanted to bill per piece, that's probably even a little bit easier. But honestly, it might not be easier as the business owner if everything else going on around all that packaging, like the shipping and transportation of it or whatever, were also being an hourly charge. Then maybe balling that all up into one like hourly run rate and dividing it by whatever my revenue from that is, that might be easier if on a per piece basis was only how these folks charged, but everyone else was hourly. So really the thing that I don't like as a consumer of labor in whatever form it is the idea of a hole being poked in my pocket and just a run rate for like specialized unknown tasks. If it's just part of normal operations, it wouldn't worry me from like a P&L perspective. So that's one thing to bear in mind. As the business owner, I might put them on some kind of salary and just reason about my expense on average. There's another element here, which is that this is the kind of work that frankly I would just I think it constitutes toil. This is like drudgery that I think should be done by a robot and not by a person. So whether I'm the one doing this work and whether it's per piece or hourly or not, my move as these people would be to develop an actual marketable skill that I can parlay in the marketplace. Because if you're just stuffing things into boxes mindlessly, it's only a matter of time before someone automates that role out of existence. And I'm not stumping one way or the other for like progress displacing people's jobs. I'm more saying that that's just going to be inevitable. There's kind of this continuum. So in the beginning, you have a highly paid expert that figures out how to do something new and sells that expertise. Then that person kind of SOPs it, standard operating procedure, so that like less high-end niched knowledge workers can also do it. So you do something unique and then you package it up so that like general like marketers or salespeople or software engineers can do it and follow the blueprint. And then from there, once you've kind of got like a relatively expensive but not crazy expensive expert doing it, or knowledge worker doing it, you try to make it even more commodified. So now, instead of somebody who makes a six-figure salary do it, is there a way you can kind of package it up into something that can be executed by people that are more like data entry people? And then from there, can you further take it into something that's just purely automated? That's kind of a natural cycle of labor. And you know where you don't want to be on that cycle is at the place where you're doing work that's very rote and wondering when the machines are going to come along and replace you. So my strategy for those people wouldn't be to try to unionize, notwithstanding my thoughts on unions, which as kind of a type A introvert lone wolf, wouldn't be my thing. But regardless of my thoughts on that, unionizing here is a bad play, because if I'm the business owner and you unionize, I just find, some startup that's like automating this and go with them anyway. And, I know that sounds heartless, but it's just a rational thing to do, because frankly, this is not a job that anybody ought to have. Even the people doing it, it's kind of I don't know, maybe it's a little higher up Maslow's hierarchies, but stuffing things into boxes 8 hours a day for the rest of your life just sounds like hell. I don't think anybody should have to do that. All right, and finally, I'm going to do question 4, which is another scenario from the same commenter on the same post, and this time he is saying, how do you handle a fixed-price project with a client when requirements are added to or taken away from the project during the contract? Do you provide another fixed-price contract with new additions or deletions each time? Do you assess those new requirements based on their value to the project and price them accordingly? No. So I think this sort of misses the point. And I don't mean this in the sense of like, whoosh, haha, you missed the point, but more like this is very steeped in the world of, if you don't come from an app dev background, my apologies, I don't remember, but if you're coming from an app dev background, the idea that a contract or work for a client is basically you get like a punch list of things to do or a general goal, like build me a website, and then you start kind of working away. And in the app dev world, custom app dev is very open-ended, very nebulous. There's a lot of ad hoc and ongoing negotiation over scope. If you're in that world, all of these things seem like reasonable questions, and they are, if you're in that world. But the world I'm talking about here, where you're delivering as a CPA like S-Corp returns, or as a lawyer, you're delivering contract reviews or whatever it is. In the very predictable world, the idea of requirements being taken away or added to by the client is literal nonsense.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Not like here. Here everything is soft and smooth.
And here's what I mean. If I am doing S-Corp election tax return prep, I know way more about that than the client. So the client comes to me and says, okay, I need to file my tax returns. I don't then go to them and say, well, okay, what do you mean by that? Do you want this worksheet? Do you want to add this addendum form? What about this? Do you have this office? I don't go and ask them a bunch of questions about their requirements, so to speak, for that deliverable. I tell them what the requirements are. I say, you need to do this, this, and this. You need to have these things prepared. And the cost of this is going to be $1,000. If there were errors in previous filings, then this happens. If there's an audit, then this happens, etc. I am the one that controls the requirements, the scope, the pricing, the whole 9 yards. And so the reason that I'm mentioning all of this is because trying to go from a world where you're doing app dev to like incremental value or flat pricing is, I think, kind of the wrong approach. It is a wholesale sea change. And you can maybe get there incrementally, but the thing is you can't take a open-ended custom app dev thing where they're giving you a bunch of requirements and wireframes and then kind of say like, okay, I'm going to flat price this and I'm going to try to like work my way. I'm going to flat price the first little bit of this that I know, and then I'm going to flat price the next bit and blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't do it that way because you're not addressing the fundamental problem. And the fundamental problem is that you're getting started on the work without really understanding all of the costs that will be involved by the end of the project. You don't understand what the client is really trying to do in a core way. They're trying to build a website, but why? What do they want to do with it? What are their goals? How are they measuring success? You understand way too few things to have a meaningful, reliable deliverable that you can say, this is how it works, this is what's going to happen, here are the contingencies. You can't do that. And so in that world, if you have that little understanding of the project, if you're that non-strategic and you're just being hired as a pair of hands, it isn't really appropriate of you to try to value price because you can't reason about that. You haven't done enough discovery with that client, and you really probably don't have enough experience at delivering kind of a repeatable productized service to be pricing based on your cost and margins. So in neither case, I mean, the only play to flat price something in this world is to take the amount of hours that you think you will spend and like triple it and then double that and then maybe double it again for good measure and offer that as a flat price. You can do that, and then you're just kind of taking a gamble that like you're not so crazy bad at estimations that you miss by an order of magnitude. That's really the only way to flat or value price custom stuff without risk. The core charter here really isn't to figure out how do you like incrementally break the project down so that you can keep issuing a bunch of flat proposals that are small enough in scope that you can do that, but you still don't understand where the finish line is. That's just kind of almost like the equivalent of, instead of billing by the hour, billing by the week or something. It's the same basic problem. What you really need to focus on here, if you're going to get into the world of meaningful value pricing or cost plus, flat pricing, margin pricing, you need to develop a deliverable that's repeatable and predictable. You need to develop a productized service or a thing that you're selling over and over and over again so that when you sell it, you can walk a customer through exactly what it's going to look like. Here's an example, maybe in the app dev world that I'm kind of throwing out there off the cuff, but like, imagine a customer said, hey, we've got this like enterprise Java code base and it has absolutely no unit tests. And what we want to do is we want to get unit test coverage around this thing. Now, what would you do at this point? I mean, if it were me, I would, well, if it were me and I really, were as averse to hourly billing as I am, I would say I can't price that. I might not take on the work, but, if you wanted that work, I would recommend that you run an hourly rate. Like, I don't know how big this is. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know what this is going to involve in the end. If you want me to get started now, I'm externalizing the risk to you. I will start writing unit tests. You will get actual value out of this, and we'll kind of stop when you run out of money or decide you've had enough or whatever. So that's the way you would approach the first one. But now imagine that instead of just moving on to like building a, web app or, mobile app or something, the way generalists do, you're just flailing from project to project. Imagine if you said, oh, I wonder if there's other enterprises out there that have Java code bases and want a bunch of unit test coverage that they don't have. And maybe what you would do then in that scenario is you would take on more and more of these engagements. Well, after you'd done like 20 of these, don't you think you would know this space pretty well? So when the 21st customer called you and said, hey, I want some unit test coverage on this Java code base, now you could probably say something like, oh, well, the first thing I really need to do to get a feel for this is run a dependency and coupling report to see how like intertangled your code base is. Then I'm also going to want to know the number of lines of code. And here's my pricing model. Based on the number of lines of code and the complexity score, if it's above this threshold, I charge 100K. If it's above this threshold, 50K, etc. Because you've done enough of these that you can look back at your previous engagements, look back at the data, how many hours it took, how many tests you had to write, all these different things. You can start to actually reason about your cost because you're delivering the same deliverable again and again. And you can start from looking at your costs to give predictable projections as to what your deliverable to the client will entail. So now you can start to say, I've got this pricing tier that is based on the unknowns. There are always going to be unknowns, but you know the unknowns. It's not the Donald Rumsfeld like unknown unknowns.
There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
Now it's known unknowns. What's the complexity of this code base? What's the scope? I'm going to give you a price based on those things. And so that's kind of the idea here. So I wouldn't suggest that you move to fixed pricing by playing games and pushing the dirty mop water around with the fundamental problem where you do hourly billing. And that fundamental problem is you do hourly billing when you have no idea what the scope or broader context is. You do hourly billing when you're just a grunt pair of hands. So you're not trying to slightly alter your billing model while remaining a grunt pair of hands. You're trying to develop a valuable, predictable deliverable that you're an expert in and that your clients are not. Thank you for watching that reader question roundup. I do appreciate you tuning into these videos. If you would like to ask a reader question, you can do so at deadtech.com youtube.com/ask. I will also have a link to that down in the description, so you can go there right from this page. If you like this video, it'd be great if you could give me a like. It's not just fluff, it actually does help the channel. And if you liked it enough that you want to subscribe, I encourage you to do so. If you're going to do that, maybe click the bell down below, because that will give you an email each time a new video is posted to the channel. And I'll say what I have always said, which is that if you don't like, feel free to give it a thumbs down. I am looking for feedback in whatever form it comes, whether it's comments, likes, dislikes, however you want to engage is, of course, your business. So with that, I will say thanks again for watching, and I will catch you next time.